my name's Caitlin Bandy, and this is my channel, BandysBooks. Today, we are here to talk about my April TBR. I can't believe how fast this year is going. Already in the 4th month of the year. And a new set of books to go with it, and a new TBR theme. Usually I pick a theme in terms of a genre. This month, instead of picking a particular genre, I thought I would focus on ARC copies of books that I've received. So these are all stacks of books that I've received from different publishers for various reasons, and then I have a handful of NetGalley ARCs that I've got as well. And I'm just a little bit behind on catching up on some of them, so I thought that this would be a good month to focus on those, especially because the majority of these books are publishing in the next couple months. So I want to get them read and reviewed and talked about in time for releases, or, for the ones that have been recently released, get a little bit of good publicity out there. So let's get into it. I'm going to just go through each book briefly. Of the print books, I think almost all of these I've already talked about at various points on the channel. So I'm just going to briefly touch base on them. The ones that I have in NetGalley, I have little short descriptions. We're not going to go into the full summary or anything like that. Otherwise, this could be, an hour and a half long video. So I'm just going to go over each book now. So in terms of print books, the first book I have is Free Love by Tessa Hadley. This is a book that is set in 1960s London, and it is about a woman's sexual awakening. Basically, she is living like a standard family unit at the time, so husband, children, and she's deeply unsatisfied with her life and finds herself kind of experimenting with her sexuality. Then I have Curfew by Jane Cowie. This is a book that is described frequently as like The Handmaid's Tale, but if the genders were reversed. So instead of the women being subjugated, it's the men that are subjugated by the women. And I'm really excited to read this. I've read a couple reviews of this on Instagram, and I'm hearing a lot of good things. I have The Impossible Us by Sarah Lotz. So this is about, it's like a sci-fi alternate universe romance. Basically, there's two people that end up emailing each other by accident, and they keep exchanging emails and find they have a lot in common. They're kind of falling for each other, and they try to meet, but they're having a hard time meeting, and eventually somehow they find out that they're in two separate dimensions that are very similar, or two separate universes that are very similar but not the same. So this would be kind of a new one for me. I've never read an AU before, but it sounds like fun. Then I have The Great Mrs. Elias by Barbara Chase Ribot. This is about Hannah Elias. She was one of the richest people in the 1800s. She was a black woman. She originally was from Philadelphia. She was a prostitute struggling to survive. And then she moves to New York City and kind of reshapes herself as a socialite, makes millions upon millions of dollars. And then eventually a murder trial or a murder conviction of some sort happens, and she gets tied up in it, and that blows her identity and causes a bunch of scandal. So I'm looking forward to this one as well. Then I have The Davos Man, How the Billionaires Devoured the World by Peter S. Goodman. So this is about the 4 richest men in the world: Jeff Bezos, Jamie Dimon, Steven Schwartzman, and Larry Fink. And it talks about, economics, how the rich keep getting richer and why, and how the world is structured. So I'm interested in reading more of this. I do enjoy economics and discussion of politics and economics, so I'm kind of looking forward to getting into this. I have Dreamfall, which is by Amy Plum. This is one that kind of reminds me a bit of The Matrix. So some teenagers, there's 5 teens, and they volunteer to take part in a radical new treatment that's supposed to help with devastating insomnia. Something goes wrong and they get stuck in this dream world, and they have to kind of figure out what's going on. Their worst nightmares are coming to life. And yeah, so it kind of reminds me a bit of the Matrix, in that they're stuck in this secondary dimension while they're asleep, and what they're dreaming of kind of becomes their reality. Looking forward to that. And then I have Open by Rachel Krantz. This is her memoir on her experiences with non-monogamy. She was previously a monogamous person. She ends up in a relationship with somebody that proposes non-monogamy, and this is her exploration of her journey through non-monogamy. I think it discusses, the pros, the cons, the issues that come up, as somebody that's experimenting with that non-monogamy. So I'm really looking forward to this. And then I have Brujas, The Magic and Power of Witches of Color by Lorraine Montague, PhD. This is a book that is broken down into different chapters that feature different groups of witches. And it talks about, brujeria or witchcraft in terms of the feminist movement, in terms of particularly communities of color. So I'm looking forward to reading this one. And then next up is the book that I've most recently received, and that's Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance by Alison Espach. This is a book about a character named Kathy, and she goes missing, and eventually they find that she's died. And it's narrated by Sally, who's her friend. It looks like it's set in the 8th grade, and this is going to be kind of about her disappearance and the impact that her death has on her community. Next up is Femlandia by Christina Dalcher. This is a post-apocalyptic book in which mother and daughter are in a country that's gone into total economic collapse. Dad's walked out, leaving them stranded. They are surrounded by violence, looting, robbing, and killing. And essentially they set off and try to find safety within a cult. This one also sounds really interesting. And then I have Anthem by Noah Hawley. I think this one's already in publication, but I received it from a publisher a little earlier this year. This is about the Float Anxiety Abatement Center in a suburb of Chicago. Simon Oliver is trying to recover from his sister's tragic passing. He breaks out to join a woman named Louise, a man called the Prophet, on a quest as urgent as it is enigmatic, who lies at the end of the road, a man known as the Wizard, whose past encounter with Louise sparked her own collapse. So this sounds really interesting as well. I love good intrigue, and I love when things are kind of set like in asylums or like mental health clinics and stuff. And possibly the one that I'm the most excited about is Bones to the Wind by Tatiana Obey. I met Tatiana through Instagram. She reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in reading a copy of her book, which I believe is the first of a duology, a Forging of Age duology. So this book is set in Northern Africa. It features a female lead character named Raja, who's determined to destroy her old man's record in the forging, a trial each child must succeed to come of age. All Raja needs to do is hunt down a Gonda, hitch its tentacle ass to her windchip, and haul it back home in record time. Easy, or it would be if Raja wasn't stuck on the same team as Nico, a know-it-all spoiled grubworm who's never does anything Raja tells her to do. So this sounds really interesting. I have seen a couple reviews of it so far. They're just starting to come in, and everybody that I've seen that's reviewed it, it's been 4 or 5 stars. And I love a good epic fantasy. I love books that are set in different countries, different regions, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what this book brings to the table. I've skimmed it already, and I am probably going to start my month by reading this one. So that's all the print books that I have, and now I'm going to go over what I have on my NetGalley list really quick. Well, there's a couple that are not NetGalleys. So first I'll go over the ones that are not NetGalleys, and then I'll go into the NetGalleys. So the first ebook that I have, and this is a little unusual for me because I don't typically read a ton of ebooks. I find that they tend to give me migraines, but I've over several months requested quite a few NetGalley books, and for whatever reason in like the last month, a whole bunch of them got approved, even though some of them have been waiting for 3 or 4 months. So all of a sudden I ended up with quite a bit. So this month is going to be a little more ebook heavy than typical. And I've also had a couple of friends reach out and ask if I wouldn't mind looking at their books. So that's why a little more ebook than normal. So first up, I have Decode Your Darkness by E.K. Richards. This is a book that is like a self-care kind of a book. It is dealing with our trauma and how we process our trauma, learning to love our darkness, learning to love who we are, and incorporate our darkness into our being. This comes from Richard's own personal experience, and I have already started reading it just a little bit, like I'm in the first few pages of it, and I'm really looking forward to diving deep into it. I was also provided a workbook to go with it to fill out, to kind of deal with my own experiences as I process the book. So I'm really looking forward to that. And the cover of this is really beautiful. It'll pop up on the screen over here. I was really drawn by that as well, because I find a lot of times that when people write like self-help, self-healing kind of books, they don't put that much effort into making the cover look beautiful, and this one's just so pretty. And then the second one that I have from Instagram is The Houseplant by Jeremy Ray. So if you're unfamiliar with Jeremy Ray, he is a short story writer, and he's very well known on social media. Really nice guy, reaching out to people that do ARC reviews and asking, if you'd be interested in reviewing a short story. So there was one particular short story I was really interested in, and it is a story told from the perspective of a plant. It's called The Houseplant. George is a fern, and he doesn't appreciate being bought by Brenda at Garden Palace, and he certainly doesn't appreciate being trapped in her house of humans. He yearns to be with the plants outside in the garden. With time, George learns to trust Brenda and think of her as his human. Then one day, tragedy strikes, and George's life will never be the same. What happens when a household loses the thing he never knew he wanted? So, I've never read a book from the perspective of a plant before. That sounded so unique. So when I was approached about reading one of his stories, that was the one that struck me immediately. So I'm really excited that he gifted me a copy to read. And then from NetGalley, I have The Necklace by Matt Whitten. That's about Susan's daughter being murdered 20 years ago, killers finally being executed, and then on the eve of the execution, she finds new evidence that someone else is actually the murderer, but nobody is taking her seriously. The police, the lawyers, everybody's like, hey, the guy is convicted and he's going to be executed, you gotta let it go. Sounds really good. I love intrigue and exploration and all that kind of stuff. I have The Temps by Andrew DeYoung, which just published the other day. I got approved for this book like 3 days before publication day. I'm really excited to get into it because it sounds so quirky and interesting. So The Temps is about a character named Jacob. He has a temp job at Delphi Enterprises, and then an accident happens. Toxic gas is basically sprayed all over the place, and everybody at Delphi headquarters dies. So Jacob is kind of exploring the building. He finds a few other temp workers who have managed to survive that weren't at this like meeting where the gassing happens. And they kind of start partying, and morbid stuff happens, and then eventually they start to uncover a shocking truth about Delphi Corporation. This one, for me, like, the cover screams quirkiness, and then the storyline screams quirkiness, and I just feel like this is going to be a really eccentric, interesting book. And then I have Four Treasures of the Sky by Jenny Qinghui Zhang. And this book is set during the 1880s American West during the Chinese Exclusion Act. This is about a character named Dayu who is kidnapped from China, smuggled to the US, and then once she arrives in the US, she's literally forced to do whatever she can to survive. She, is forced into slavery, prostitution, and many other things, and it's in a time when anti-Chinese sentiments in the United States are super, super high, so it's just, it's going to be a really difficult moving book, I think. After that, I have The Silent Unseen by Amanda McCrinna. This is a historical fiction, World War II era, set in Poland, and Maria is just returning home from years of forced labor. She finds her whole village destroyed. Her parents have been killed by Ukrainian nationalists. Local resistance is commanded by her older brother Tomek, who she thought was dead. She's like super surprised to see him there. And he then disappears again because he is silent unseen, which is code name for the special forces, but she's determined that she's not going to lose him a second time, and so she goes off in search of him. And Then I Woke Up by Malcolm Devlin is the next book. It is about an unusual plague of monsters lurking in the streets and survivors that are arming themselves trying to protect themselves from the monsters, except it's hard to be sure what's really going on because the disease or this plague affects your perception of reality. Spence is one of the people that have been cured. He's haunted by the guilt of what he's done, and he refuses to face the world until another inmate asks him to help her find her old crew. So this is one of those things where, like, I feel like it's going to be a really unreliable narrator. If the plague, affects your perception of reality, like you're imagining monsters hunting you and all this scary shit happening, and like maybe people dying and stuff, and maybe that's not the reality at all. After that, I have The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray. So this one sounds really interesting, and I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about it. It is all characters from Jane Austen novels, and apparently it's about a summer house party that turns into a whodunit when Jane Austen's notorious Mr. Wickham turns up murdered. I haven't read a whole lot of Jane Austen, so I'm not sure if I'm going to get all the references in this or not. I think when I requested this, I didn't realize that it was like a play on Jane Austen's characters. I think I thought it was like more of a murder mystery. After that, I have When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. This is a feminist tale set in 1950s America where thousands of women spontaneously turn into dragons. Alex, a young girl, is left to survive in the wake of the mass dragoning. And it's an event that her own aunt turned into a dragon during, and she has a lot of questions. She's trying to like ask her family, ask her teachers, and nobody wants to talk about it. Everybody's just like, we don't speak of this event. And I guess we're gonna find out why all these women spontaneously turned into dragons. But this sounds like a super unique plot. I love dragons. That's like probably one of my favorite mythical creatures. There's just a lot of things that I really love about this description, so I think it's going to be a good one as well. And then I requested this particular book back prior to my romance reading month. I had hoped that I would get approved for it for my romance month, but I got the approval like 2 days ago. And that's Café con Leche by Emery Lee. Theo and Gabrielle have always been at odds. Both of their parents own bakeries, and they're kind of like a rival companies. Gabby has caused the loss of too many of their soccer team's games, and Theo resents him for that. Both feel stuck by familial obligations, being stuck trying to like help their parents drum up business for their respective bakeries. But eventually a new fusion restaurant pops up in town, and it's beginning to steal customers from both companies. So Theo and Gabby decide to team up to secure the family business. But are their feelings going to get in the way? So I think that this is like an enemies to lovers kind of a situation. I'm kind of curious to see how it's going to go. I think it's going to be a cute book. Next up is City of Orange by David Yoon. And basically this is about a man who wakes up in an unknown landscape. He's injured and he's completely alone. It kind of goes over reassembling the things that make us who we are and finding a way home again. The cover of this one is really pretty as well. I really like all the bright colors on it. Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour. So Sarah runs away from home at 16. Eventually she becomes like a really, really renowned bartender in Los Angeles. Emmy is stuck in her life and she takes a job at Yerba Buena arranging flowers. They meet and they feel an instant spark, but can their love overcome their past? Can they kind of let their walls down to be with each other? After that, I have Together We Burn by Isabel Ibanez. I'm excited about this one. 18-year-old Zarela Zalvidar is a talented flamenco dancer, plus daughter of the most famous draganador in Hispalia. During a fight, disaster strikes. So basically her father gets killed in a dragon fight. He's just like they have the bullfighters in Spain. I think she's basing this on that, but he fights dragons instead. So he gets killed, leaves her to deal with her inheritance, and then the shady group called the Dragon Guild is trying to steal her inheritance from her. But in order to prevent that from happening, she has to reach out to her enemy, Arturo Diaz de Montserrat, the most talented dragon fighter that's left in the land. If he won't help, her world will be destroyed. Again, I already mentioned I love dragons. I love seeing how people incorporate different cultures into fantasy. It's like one of my absolute favorite things. This sounds like it's going to be a blast. And I have How to Be Eaten by Maria Adelman. This is set in present-day NYC. There's 5 women meeting in a group to discuss their trauma. The women start off wary of each other, but gradually they begin to realize they have more in common than they suspect. So I think, if I remember correctly, this is based on fairy tales. So the 5 different women are various female characters from fairy tales, and I think they start to realize that their stories are connected. And then I have Nevada by Imogen Binney. This, I believe, is a republication of a book that was already pre-published. So Maria, almost 30, is a trans woman who's working in a bookstore in New York City. She's trying to be true to her punk values. She breaks up with her girlfriend, Steph, steals her car, and then heads off on a road trip to Star City, Nevada, where she finds herself becoming a role model for a potentially trans young person named James. So I think this is all about like her adventure and then this relationship that she forms with this young person who is potentially going through a trans experience. And I have The Hive by Melissa Scholes Young. The four Feller sisters grew up immersed in the pest control business in rural Missouri. Their father dies. They're shocked to find that he's left the business to a distant cousin instead of his girls because, you know, women, they can't run businesses. Mom decides she wants to trade duty for romance and is kind of, like, not really involved. With the threat of an oncoming civil war, the sisters must unite to survive. So this one also kind of sounds unique to me. I think there's, like, a lot of interesting concepts going on. And then I have Blood and Moonlight by Erin Beatty, which is a fantasy mystery thriller about Katrine, an orphan with supernatural sight granted by the moon, who becomes stuck between a murderer and a detective after witnessing a crime. Again, this is like right up my alley. I love mysteries, I love thrillers, I love fantasy. All those elements sound great to me. And finally, I have The Fortunes of Jaded Women by Carolyn Wynne. The Duong sisters are cursed with a generational curse to never find love and never have sons. Mai knows the curse well. She is estranged from her sisters, Min and Quiyen. After receiving an unexpected prophecy from a trusted psychic, the family reunites for better or for worse. So I think we're going to get a couple generations of the family back together, and they're going to try to figure out a way to break this generational curse of no love and no sons. That's all of the books that I have. I'm super, super excited about the variety of genres, the variety of different authors, different backgrounds. I'm really looking forward to reading all of these, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun, in particular because most of these authors are not authors I'm familiar with. I think there's just a couple, like Isabel Ibanez, where I have a couple of her other books, but I haven't actually even read any of her other books. I just own a couple of them with the intent to read them. And I'm really excited about finding, you know, some indie authors. Like I said, I have a couple friends from Instagram where I'm getting to read their first works, and I'm very excited about that. Definitely will be linking anyone in the comments below that has an Instagram or social media, so you can follow them too. And yeah, I hope that you'll enjoy seeing some of the more indie works. I know that a lot of times I incorporate a lot of more popular books, and there's nothing wrong with that. I support popular authors, I support indie authors. You know, I just want to support the book industry in general. But in particular, I think it's important, you know, to try to balance pulling in indie authors when I can, because I know that so many authors work so hard and, you know, they don't get necessarily the recognition that they deserve. It's super hard to get in with big publishers, and, you know, the hustle that people do when they're doing self-publishing or small publishing is remarkable. So I want to make sure I shout those books out when I can. That's the end of this video. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up button. Comment down below, do you read indie authors? And if you do, recommend me your favorite indie author. I want to find new authors, especially like local authors or small authors that, you know, maybe deserve a little more recognition than they're getting. And finally, if you're not already subscribed to my channel and you find my content interesting, hit the subscribe button. I post regularly, post bookish recipes, book hauls, TBRs, wrap-ups, and blogs, everything in between. So I'd love to see you in another video. Thank you so much for joining. Again, I'm Caitlin Bandy. This is Bandy's Books. Bye. Pause.